CNN Breaking News.
Good morning, everyone. So grateful to have you with us. We are watching closely what is happening in the G20 summit there. These are pictures that are just coming into us moments ago. Let's listen. Okay, it looks like we caught the tail end of it as they were just wrapping up there. But the critical moment today is this meeting with President Trump and President Xi Jinping of China, because surely North Korea is going to take center stage in the middle of that meeting. And the president saying he doesn't know how much he can count on China anymore.
The president tweeting out just one day before coming to Hamburg there that they tried the option with the Chinese. I'm paraphrasing here, but it didn't work out. Just 6 months into the administration, the president sitting down, obviously North Korea at the top of the list, but trade obviously will be a discussion there. The islands in the South China Sea also up for discussion likely. So we'll wait for a readout from one of the representatives to tell us exactly what they discussed there during that meeting. Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, when you look at some of the controversy over the last few months of what's happened, just a couple weeks ago, this $1.4 billion arms sale to Taiwan has not left China very happy with the U.S. In terms of military, we've got last Sunday, the U.S. Navy had a destroyer that sailed within 20 miles of the disputed islands there. And then Thursday, two U.S. B-1 bombers flew over disputed waters in East and South China Seas. So China has concerns of its own when it comes to the U.S. Let's go to Jim Acosta now. He is there in Hamburg, and he's going to help walk us through what it is we're looking at, Jim, and what we know was said in that meeting. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, we expect to have some kind of readout and hopefully some pictures, unless you're already seeing those pictures coming in. This is happening as we speak between President Trump and Chinese President Xi here at the G20 summit in Hamburg. Yes, there's a lot for these two leaders to discuss, but right at the top of the list, obviously, is North Korea. President Trump has been expressing his frustrations over the last several days, essentially saying that, well, I tried to work with President Xi on this issue of reining in North Korea, but they keep launching these missile tests and so on. And in the last few days, the president has said, well, I tried. Now, we should point out during this foreign trip, the president was asked, well, are you giving up on working with President Xi when it comes to North Korea? And he said, no, never give up. And so I think it's going to be interesting to find out what the body language is going to be like here in the next few moments as all of this information comes in, and then what exactly is said. If past is prologue, there may not be a whole lot of substance that is said in front of the cameras, as we've noticed in a lot of these bilateral meetings when the press is allowed in and they allow the press to take their pictures and take their video of what's said between these two leaders. There isn't a great deal of substance. We have to rely on officials after these meetings are over to ascertain exactly what happened. But, one other thing we want to point out as this G20 summit is wrapping up, President Trump is not expected to hold a news conference as he leaves this G20 summit. That is breaking with a precedent that American presidents have shown in the last several years. President Obama would typically hold an end of G20 summit news conference. He is not doing that. I don't know if you can see this over my shoulder right now. There's a big monitor behind me that shows the German Chancellor Angela Merkel giving a news conference to the world press as we speak. We expect to have one from Vladimir Putin, as a matter of fact. He's expected to also hold a news conference, as well as the French President Emmanuel Macron. So President Trump not really in keeping with the company here. His colleagues here at the G20. From what we understand, Vladimir Putin is actually holding his own news conference as we speak. And so, guys, as all these questions are swirling around President Trump in terms of what was said behind closed doors in that meeting with Vladimir Putin, the president's decision not to hold a news conference at the end of this summit, and Vladimir Putin holding this news conference right now, is essentially giving the Russians the opportunity to sort of put their spin out there in terms of what went on in this meeting. We do believe that perhaps there might be a gaggle of some sort with reporters on Air Force One as reporters are traveling with the president back to Washington. But I just want to make sure we emphasize to our viewers that this is unusual for a president of the United States to go to a G20 summit like this and not have the president himself, or at least top officials, officials brief reporters on what happened overall at the summit. One other final quick thing, the G20 summit, as it's wrapping up here, has put out one of these joint statements, communiques, whatever you want to, whatever folks call them, as they're leaving the summit here. It does take note, this collective statement on the part of the G20 does take note of the fact that the U.S. is pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. And so that was also a big subject of conversation here between these world leaders.
All right, Jim Acosta there for us at the G20. As you said, over your shoulder, there's that monitor that shows Angela Merkel speaking. We want to go now to Nick Robertson as well. Nick, what are we hearing from Angela Merkel as we wrap up the G20 here? We know that this was set initially as interconnectivity being part of the theme and the headline of potentially the isolation of the U.S. In these multilateral deals that have been struck. What are we hearing from Angela Merkel?
Well, of course, Angela Merkel is the host here, and she does the sort of final big wrap-up. And to Jim's point about President Trump not speaking, President Putin able to define his message, to a degree, Angela Merkel is really able to sort of put a cap on everything that was agreed and disagreed here. And the very important and big ticket items here, trade. There was a huge concern going into this, a difference over the U.S. position and the other G20 members' position on trade. There was a real fear of sort of protectionism, America first, with President Trump has said, yes, free trade's okay, but it must be fair trade. Angela Merkel, the big ticket item there on trade, said there's an agreement that keeps markets open, fights protectionism. So that's very much, if you will, taking a position that's against the position where President Trump has really been. There's some language in there that will make President Trump feel a little better. It says that they agree to fight unfair trade. Again, President Trump has said free trade, yes, but it must be fair trade. But this is a win for the other members of the G20. This is one, if you will, that President Trump will have to take on the chin. Excess steel in the global market. Now, that's something that Angela Merkel was talking about. That was a concern of President Trump, is a concern of President Trump. There was a big fear here that he might put tariffs or quotas on steel. There was talk from the European members here, from Angela Merkel as well, and her team, that that could spark a trade war. That seems to be headed off. The way that it's headed off is there does seem to be an agreement to form an international body to look at at steel production and sales across the world, to present a paper by November later this year. So there is something in that for President Trump, absolutely, that he will get an accounting of where the world thinks things are on steel. But on climate change, Angela Merkel gets her way. She wanted to be able to say in the communique, she said at the very beginning that it is important that we can say that we differ on certain issues. And as she said on climate change, she said it was deplorable that the United States under President Trump is backing out, or appears to be backing out, of the Paris Climate Agreement. She said all other 19 members here agree to enforce that.
All right. Hey, thank you so much, Nick Robertson. We appreciate it. I want to get back to Jim Acosta now, because we were just talking to Jim about the fact that President Trump was not going to speak to the media. But, Jim, you did hear from him. Is that correct?
That's right. In one of these bilateral sprays, as they're called, where the press is allowed in momentarily, to capture a few moments between these two leaders. Not sure exactly whether this was in response to a question or whether he just volunteered the comments, but President Trump, in that meeting with President Xi, when the press was in the room on North Korea, said something has to be done about it. President Trump said that eventually there will be a success when dealing with Pyongyang, the regime there in North Korea, and in a quote here, maybe longer than I like, talking about how long this is going to take, more than you like, but there will be a success one way or the other. So the president, they're talking in general terms, how he'd like to see some kind of progress when it comes to dealing with North Korea. Not the sort of saber-rattling statements that we heard from the president, at least in that initial readout that we're getting just at this moment. There may be more on this. I want to caution our viewers. But it does appear he is saying in this brief moment with President Xi, where the cameras were in the room, something has to be done about North Korea. Of course, people around the world feel the exact same way. The question, obviously, is what exactly can be done about North Korea. And a lot of critics of what's been going on over the last several months in terms of the U.S. dealings with North Korea, China's dealings with North Korea, is that there just aren't a whole lot of great options in terms of dealing with the regime in Pyongyang and trying to curb its nuclear program. But the president there saying with President Xi that something has to be done about it. Again, not sure yet whether that was in response to a number of questions or this was just something he volunteered at that moment. But again, as we were saying earlier, he's not going to be giving us a chance to ask him questions. He's leaving Hamburg shortly to head back to Washington, guys.